Kaziranga National Park, dawn. The morning light had barely begun to soften the edges of the trees when Ranger Anil's eyes caught sight of a solitary elephant standing motionless near the river's edge. It was immediately clear that something was wrong. The great animal was not moving with the usual slow, purposeful grace of its kind, but was frozen in place, its head lowered and trunk trailing gently over the soft earth. Beside it lay the still body of another elephant, lifeless, fallen, a silent shadow beside the rising sun. Anil felt a quiet catch in his chest, sensing the weight of the moment before even drawing closer. There was no bustle here, no signs of panic or distress, only a heavy, poignant stillness, as if time itself had paused in respect. The living elephant's body language told the story more clearly than any human voice could. Its legs were planted firmly, unmoving, as though it was anchored to the spot by an invisible tether. The great creature's eyes, dark and deep, glistened with the faintest trace of moisture, and its ears, usually flicking or shifting with alertness, drooped gently as if exhausted not just physically, but emotionally. Anil knew that elephants were deeply social animals, and that their bonds with one another often mirrored the closest human relationships, filled with complexity and deep affection. Yet here, witnessing this silent vigil, he understood grief in a raw and elemental form, a grief that transcended words and unfolded in quiet gestures and patient endurance. The dead elephant's body was partly concealed beneath a scattering of tall grasses and wildflowers, its massive frame now motionless, the breath of life stilled. Its skin, once warm and pulsing with strength, was already cooling under the gentle caress of the morning air. Nearby, the river curved softly, its surface catching the first light like a shimmering ribbon, while birds began their waking calls far above the canopy. But these sounds, so full of promise and renewal, seemed to exist in another world, as though this small clearing had become a sanctuary for sorrow. The living elephant's slow, measured breaths filled the quiet, a rhythm both steady and heavy with loss. Anil moved with careful deliberation, aware that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile moment. He knelt down a few meters away, letting his presence become part of the landscape without disturbance. From this distance he could see the subtle details that spoke volumes, the slight tremor in the elephant's massive shoulders, the occasional gentle touch of its trunk to the earth or to the body it guarded. The animal did not feed or drink. It did not respond to the calls of others in the nearby herd or the stirrings of the forest. Instead, it remained steadfast, a silent sentinel, refusing to abandon the one it had lost. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and fresh leaves, mingled with the distant musk of the wild. The light shifted slowly, dappling through the branches and setting patches of gold upon the elephant's wrinkled skin. Each breath it took was slow and deliberate, a soft exhalation that mingled with the whisper of the river's current. The landscape around them was alive and awakening, langurs calling in the trees, hornbills taking flight with their heavy wing beats, and insects beginning their low hum. Yet all these signs of life seemed distant, as if held at bay by the depth of the elephant's sorrow. Anil reflected on the stark reality facing the elephant. The dead companion was no longer able to walk beside it, to feed, or to drink. Yet this living creature stayed, tethered by invisible threads of memory and affection. If it moved away, it might lose the connection that had sustained their bond. But staying so close to a decomposing body carried risks: the spread of disease, attracting predators, and the potential for the elephant's own strength to wane without nourishment. For now, the animal seemed to accept these risks without question, its loyalty outweighing the dangers. From Anil's perspective, the stakes were clear and urgent. If the elephant ran or was frightened away, it might leave behind not only the body but also its own will to survive this loss. If humans intervened too quickly, they risked breaking this fragile vigil and causing trauma deeper than any wound. Yet doing nothing could lead to suffering if the elephant weakened or fell ill. Anil whispered softly, barely audible over the gentle sounds of the river. "It's okay," he said, a quiet offering of reassurance not meant to rush or command, but simply to share calm and presence. The elephant's gaze flickered briefly toward him, dark eyes filled with a quiet depth, then returned slowly to the body it protected. The next hours passed in a kind of sacred stillness. The sun rose higher, bathing the scene in warm light that touched the river's rippling surface and glistened on the elephant's thick, dust-speckled hide. Anil remained nearby, sitting on a low stone, watching the slow, patient movements of the animal's trunk as it gently stroked the ground around the fallen companion. There was no hurry here, no abrupt action, only the enduring presence of grief held in the span of a breath, the curve of a trunk, and the shifting weight of a great beast unwilling to leave what had been lost. At times, the elephant emitted soft, low, trumpeting sounds, barely audible but rich with meaning. These calls seemed to echo both its sorrow and its steadfastness, a language older than words, spoken in a voice that carried across the riverbanks and through the early morning light. Other elephants in the distance responded faintly, their own calls tinged with concern and curiosity, but the solitary figure by the dead body did not move toward them. Instead, it remained there, the two bodies forming a quiet testament to the strength of connection and the depth of loss. As the day slowly unfolded, Anil understood that this moment would be etched forever in his memory. Here, in the wild heart of Kaziranga, a silent vigil was being kept, not out of fear or confusion, but out of an unyielding love that transcended death. The elephant's refusal to leave was both heartbreaking and humbling, a reminder of the complex emotional lives that these great creatures lead. Anil's presence was small and still, a respectful witness to the profound grief unfolding before him. The risk remained. If the elephant continued to stay without food or water, its strength could fail, and the very act of mourning might lead to suffering. But for now, this was a sacred pause, a moment when nature showed its most delicate and human-like tenderness without words or sentimentality. The morning deepened into day, light shifting slowly across the river and forest, while the solitary elephant stood rooted by the dead body, an enduring symbol of loss and loyalty beneath the wide, open sky. Anil finally stood and took a few steps back, careful not to disturb the fragile peace. The elephant's gaze met his once more, a brief flicker of recognition passing silently between them. Then, with slow, measured steps, the animal adjusted its stance but did not move away. It remained, a sentinel in a quiet world, carrying the weight of loss with a dignity beyond words. And as Anil turned toward the trail that would lead him back to camp, he carried with him the heavy, tender knowledge of what he had witnessed, a silent vigil by the river that would stay with him forever. Anil moved slowly through the soft underbrush, his eyes fixed on the solitary elephant that had remained steadfast beside the fallen companion since the early dawn. The elephant's movements were hesitant, marked by a weight that went far beyond the physical burden of its massive frame. Each step it took seemed an effort, a quiet struggle against a tide of exhaustion and sorrow. The animal's trunk extended cautiously toward the dry earth, brushing gently over scattered leaves and soil, then curled back as if unsure whether to feed or not. Nearby, a shallow pool of water gleamed in the increasing light, but the elephant showed no interest in drinking. Instead, it emitted soft, mournful trumpeting, low, trembling sounds that seemed to carry the ache of loss and confusion across the still morning air. This sound held no urgency, but was instead steeped in a quiet sadness that filled the space between the trees, folding around the pair like a shroud. The atmosphere was heavy with grief, unspoken but palpable, as if the earth itself mourned alongside the elephant. The elephant's eyes, dark and vast, lacked their usual brightness. They remained dull and distant, fixed mostly on the lifeless body that they had refused to leave since the first sight of their companion's final breath. The elephant's breathing was slow but labored, marked by occasional pauses and a faint shudder that moved through its enormous shoulders. Its ears hung low, moving only occasionally in response to distant calls of birds or the rustling of leaves. The tail flicked faintly now and then, but it was a weak motion, a subtle sign of life amid the overwhelming stillness. To an observer like Anil, familiar with the rhythms of the wild, these gestures spoke volumes. The elephant was caught in the raw and elemental grip of grief, manifesting not through dramatic gestures but through measured restraint and a heartbreaking refusal to move on. Around them, the forest stirred with gentle life. The tall trees whispered softly in the breeze, their leaves shimmering with droplets of dew. Birds began their morning songs, while insects rose in a low hum that filled the undergrowth. But these sounds of life and renewal felt distant, as though muted by the weight of the elephant's mourning. The river nearby babbled quietly, its steady current a reminder of the natural cycles that continued regardless of individual loss. Yet within this quiet corner of Kaziranga, time seemed to bend inward, drawn tight by the unyielding presence of an animal anchored by sorrow. Anil kept his distance, moving slowly and carefully to avoid startling the elephant. He understood that any sudden noise or abrupt movement could shatter the fragile vigil and send the animal into flight. The elephant was alone in this act of mourning. No other herd members had come to join or console it. This isolation underscored the intensity of the loss and the depth of attachment the animal held. Elephants are known for their complex social bonds, and here, that bond was expressed in a refusal to abandon the dead, a loyalty that transcended instinct and survival. The animal's grief was a visible, tangible force. Quiet, patient, and enduring. The dead companion's body lay partially covered by grass and wildflowers, the skin cooling beneath the early sun's warmth. Its stillness was stark. A final silence that contrasted sharply with the life clinging stubbornly to the living elephant. Anil watched as the elephant's trunk moved in slow, deliberate circles over the fallen body, a tender gesture that held no rush, no intrusion, only respect. The elephant's refusal to eat or drink was a risk, one that could weaken its own strength in the days to come. Without nourishment and hydration, the animal's chances of survival diminished steadily. Yet it chose to stay, tethered by a bond invisible to the human eye but powerful beyond measure. From Anil's perspective, the stakes were clear and pressing. If the elephant fled in fear or confusion, it might leave behind more than a body. It could lose the will to endure the loss, its emotional distress compounding physical dangers. If the elephant remained too long without intervention, it risked collapse from dehydration or starvation, vulnerable to predators drawn by the scent of death. Anil understood that any human interference had to be measured, calm, and deeply respectful, for any aggressive approach might break the fragile trust and cause harm. "It's okay," he whispered softly, not expecting an answer but offering a quiet presence, a steady calm in a world filled with loss. The elephant's trunk twitched slightly in response and its eyes briefly lifted toward Anil before falling back to the lifeless form beside it. The gesture was subtle. A small acknowledgement that did not break the vigil but allowed a moment of shared stillness between human and animal. The elephant's slow breathing continued, rhythmic and heavy, each exhale a small release of tension and sorrow. The low trumpeting sounds rose again, soft and aching, filling the space with the sound of a heart struggling to understand what had been lost. The cries were not frantic, but mournful, an expression of grief held tightly in an ancient language spoken by giants whose memories spanned generations. As the sun climbed higher, warming the earth and casting shifting shadows across the landscape, the elephant remained unmoved. Its physical exhaustion was evident, the sagging shoulders, the hesitant steps, and the slight trembling of its legs. Yet the animal refused to leave the spot, refusing to let go of the bond it had with the dead. This was not denial, but a deliberate choice, a natural expression of mourning that underscored the emotional complexity of these creatures. Anil recognized in this behavior a reflection of the human experience of loss, a reminder that grief is universal and profound, even in the wild. Anil shifted his gaze carefully, scanning the surroundings for any signs of predators or other dangers drawn by the scent of decay. The risk to the elephant was real and immediate. Predators like tigers or wild dogs might be attracted to the carcass, threatening not only the dead but also the vulnerable mourner. The animal's refusal to move increased this danger, as its weakened state would make defense difficult. Anil's role became one of quiet vigilance, observing, assessing, and being ready to intervene gently if the balance tipped toward harm. The risk of human presence provoking flight or panic was equally serious, so Anil maintained his distance and calm, becoming a still part of the forest itself. Minutes bled into hours, with the slow passage of time marked only by the elephant's steady breathing and the soft murmur of the forest. The tension in the air remained, a weight carried quietly by both elephant and human observer. Anil felt a profound humility, understanding that he was witnessing an ancient ritual, one of connection, loss, and the slow, painful process of release. The elephant's refusal to leave was an act of devotion and an embrace of sorrow that transcended survival instincts. It was a silent testimony to the depths of animal emotion and the fragile bonds that tie creatures to one another in the wild. The afternoon sun continued to climb, illuminating the leaves and glistening on the river's surface while the elephant remained anchored to its vigil. Anil stayed nearby, a respectful guardian of this moment, knowing that any movement from the elephant was a decision weighed carefully between physical need and emotional loyalty. The stakes could not be ignored. If the elephant weakened too much, it might not survive the ordeal. If it fled too soon, the trauma of separation could deepen wounds unseen. For now, the balance held, fragile and unspoken, in the quiet dance between loss and life. As daylight waned, the elephant's breathing grew even slower, its posture more settled but no less mournful. The low trumpeting faded into soft rumbles, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. Anil felt the weight of the moment settle deep into his bones, a quiet testament to the endurance of love and grief in a world that often seemed harsh and indifferent. This silent vigil was a story written in gestures and breath, a living memorial to a bond that death had not yet severed. And as the shadows lengthened and the forest prepared to rest once more, the elephant remained steadfast, holding on to the last threads of connection beside the lifeless body, where grief and loyalty intertwined beneath the broad sky. Anil approached the elephant's resting place with careful steps, each movement slow and deliberate to avoid disturbing the fragile atmosphere that hung over the riverbank. The day had grown warmer and the earth beneath was dry, cracked in places, yet life still thrived quietly among the tall grasses and scattered trees. Anil carried with him a small bundle of fresh leaves and a container of clean water, offerings meant not to intrude, but to gently support the elephant in a moment that was both tender and fraught with risk. As he moved closer, the elephant's posture shifted slightly, its massive frame responding with tentative curiosity, though it remained firmly anchored near the lifeless companion it refused to leave behind. The air between them was thick with unspoken grief. Yet Anil's presence was steady and calm, a silent pledge that the elephant was not alone. The elephant's breathing was slow but uneven, a soft, measured rhythm marked by occasional pauses. Its trunk reached out hesitantly toward the fresh leaves Anil had placed on the ground nearby, delicate fingers curling around the tender greenery. There was a cautious grace in the elephant's movements, a careful negotiation between trust and sorrow. The water container lay untouched at first, but after several minutes the elephant's trunk swept gently toward it, dipping into the cool liquid. It drank slowly, cautiously, as if testing the gift and the safety of this small human gesture. Anil remained motionless, kneeling a short distance away, his breath quiet and his gaze steady. The elephant did not move away from the fallen body, but the small acceptance of nourishment signaled a fragile bridge between mourning and survival. The landscape around them pulsed with life, though muted by the weight of the moment. Leaves rustled softly in the gentle breeze, birds called quietly from distant branches, and the nearby river sang a steady song as it wound its way through the forest. The sun filtered through the canopy in scattered beams, dappling the elephant's thick skin and highlighting the faint dust settled on its broad back. The elephant's eyes, though still shadowed by loss, showed a subtle shift, a momentary easing of tension as it allowed the presence of the human and the gifts offered. Its ears twitched gently, flicking away flies and softening the sharp lines of exhaustion etched on its face. These small signs spoke of a deep, unspoken communication, a fragile trust formed not by words but by respect and gentleness. Anil watched the elephant with quiet reverence, understanding that his role was not to force change but to offer comfort in whatever form the animal would accept. The risk remained high. The elephant's refusal to move from the dead body put it in danger of dehydration, weakness, and predator attention. Yet forcing it to leave abruptly could cause trauma far worse than the physical threat of staying. The delicate balance between respect and intervention was the core of every decision Anil made that day. By placing water and leaves nearby without sudden moves, he created space for the elephant's grief to unfold naturally while gently supporting the animal's basic needs. This was not rescue by force, but rescue by presence, by quiet understanding. The elephant's trunk returned repeatedly to the leaves, pulling them slowly into its mouth with a careful chewing that spoke of physical need, tempered by emotional heaviness. It took small sips of water, pausing between to breathe and glance back at the fallen companion. The elephant's soft trumpeting sounded again, low and mournful, but this time with a hint of calm threading through the notes. Anil's voice was barely audible as he whispered, "It's okay, girl," a simple offering of kindness without expectation. The elephant's ears twitched once more, and though its gaze remained fixed on the body, the slight movement toward the fresh food and water was a visible step, small but meaningful. As the afternoon stretched on, the human presence settled into a quiet rhythm alongside the elephant's vigil. There was no rush, no abrupt motion, only the steady passage of time and the subtle shifts of a grieving animal beginning to accept gentle care. The river continued its slow flow nearby, the scent of wet earth mixing with the faint fragrance of leaves and the drying grass underfoot. The elephant's body language softened, shoulders less rigid and steps more measured when it moved, even if only to adjust its position slightly closer to the new offerings. Anil remained patient, sensing the fragile thread that linked grief to hope, understanding that each small action could carry immense emotional weight. The risks had not vanished. The elephant's strength was still fragile, and the proximity to the decomposing carcass invited danger. Predators might come, drawn by the scent, and the elephant's endurance was uncertain. But in this moment, Anil's quiet gestures brought a small reprieve, a gentle comfort that allowed the animal to rest while still holding on. The acceptance of water and leaves was a sign that survival was still possible, even in the shadow of loss. It was a balance of life and death, of pain and compassion, played out in the quiet exchange between human and elephant. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the earth, the elephant remained close to the body but was now touched by the care that had been offered. Its breathing grew steadier, the faintest relaxation visible in the slow blinking of its eyes and the gentle waving of its ears. Anil stayed with the animal a little longer before slowly standing and retreating, leaving the fresh water and leaves within easy reach. The elephant did not move away but seemed to acknowledge the gesture, the brief but powerful connection between loss and the hope of care. The day closed softly around them, the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds weaving into the quiet dusk. Anil's presence had become a steady, respectful support, never intrusive, always patient and gentle. The elephant's vigil continued, but now with a small bridge toward survival, built from quiet acts of kindness and the unspoken understanding that grief, though heavy, could be held with gentle comfort. As dusk settled over the forest, the shifting light softened and deepened, folding the trees into shadows that stretched across the riverbank. The elephant had not moved far from the lifeless companion, its massive body curling slowly into a protective posture beside the still form. Its trunk wrapped gently around the fallen companion's leg, a fragile embrace in the gathering darkness. The animal's breathing slowed, heavy and even, as exhaustion crept steadily into its frame. The quiet sounds of the wild grew more distinct, distant calls of night birds, the rustle of leaves as small creatures stirred, and the gentle flow of the river murmuring nearby. Each sound seemed to underscore the stillness of the vigil, the weight of loss hanging quietly between the living and the dead. Anil sat near the campfire a short distance away, its flickering light casting long, soft shadows around him. His eyes remained fixed on the elephant, alert but calm, bearing witness to something far greater than a mere struggle for survival. This was a silent ceremony, an ancient act of mourning etched into the fabric of the wild. The elephant's body shifted occasionally, subtle movements that spoke of discomfort and fatigue, but also of a steadfast will to remain close. Its ears flicked in the cooling air, brushing away insects, while the trunk gently swept over the ground as if soothing unseen pain. Despite the long hours without nourishment, the animal's strength persisted, held taut by the bond it shared with the fallen companion. Anil understood that this endurance was not simply physical. It was woven with threads of emotion, memory, and connection that transcended instinct. The elephant's mournful trumpeting had quieted, replaced by low rumbles that vibrated softly through the air, a muted language of sorrow and presence that needed no translation. The stakes remained clear. If the elephant weakened too much during the night, it risked collapse or attack, but if it moved away, it would be forced to sever a bond that had taken root deep within its being. Anil's own breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the night, his eyes scanning the perimeter for signs of predators or other disturbances. The campfire crackled gently, its warmth a fragile barrier against the creeping chill. Despite the calm, the danger was ever present. The scent of the carcass still lingered, an invitation to scavengers that could turn deadly. Anil remained vigilant but respectful, never approaching the elephant too closely, knowing that trust was earned in stillness and patience. The quiet presence of the human was a gentle support rather than a threat, a silent companion in the long night watch. "You're almost there," he whispered once, voice low and steady, not expecting a response but offering solace to the grieving animal. The forest around them settled into a delicate balance between night and day, shadow and light. The wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying scents of earth and water, mingling with the faint odor of decay that marked the boundary between life and death. The elephant's eyes closed briefly, a slow blink that seemed to release a measure of weariness, yet its trunk never left the fallen body's side. Even in rest, the vigil continued. The elephant's slow, measured breaths became a quiet heartbeat in the darkness, a fragile thread holding together a story of loss, loyalty, and survival. Anil felt the profound gravity of the moment settle deep inside him, a weight both humbling and sacred. This was not merely the endurance of life, it was the raw expression of mourning, a powerful reminder of the depth and complexity of the animal heart. Hours passed with little change, marked only by the shifting shadows and the soft glow of the dying fire. The elephant remained still, guarding the fallen companion through the darkest hours, its body a living shield against the night's dangers. Anil's vigilance did not waver. He watched quietly, knowing that his presence was part of a delicate dance between human intervention and natural process. The risk was constant. A sudden predator's approach, a weakening of the elephant's will, or disturbance that could shatter the fragile peace. Yet through the long night, the vigil held firm. The elephant's grief was a living thing, a silent witness to the bonds that endure even beyond death. As dawn began to pale the horizon, casting soft light over the forest, the elephant stirred gently. Its movements were slow but deliberate, the weight of night's watch lingering in every step. Anil rose silently, preparing to continue the day's care with the same quiet respect and patience. The bond between the living and the lost remained unbroken, held tenderly in the cool morning air. The night had passed, heavy and profound, a testament to the resilience of mourning in the wild. The fire's last embers faded, carried away by the gentle morning breeze. The forest awakened softly around them, the distant murmur of a herd moving through the trees just audible in the fresh light. The elephant lifted its head slowly, eyes reflecting the dawn's pale glow, still close beside the fallen companion, still holding the long watch that no words could explain but all hearts could feel. The days unfolded slowly, each morning bringing subtle changes that whispered of both fragility and hope. The elephant, once rooted like a statue beside the fallen companion, began to move with a tentative caution that marked a shift in the long vigil. Its heavy footsteps pressed softly into the earth as it stepped away from the carcass, driven by a growing need to drink. Yet each time the elephant left, it returned swiftly, as if tethered invisibly to the site of loss, reluctant to sever the bond completely. Anil observed these movements carefully, aware that every step carried risk. The elephant was still vulnerable, its strength sapped by days without proper nourishment, its muscles showing faint signs of weakness beneath the thick, dusted skin. But with those signs came small moments of gentle curiosity, a lifted ear at a distant bird call, a slow sweep of the trunk over the river's edge, and the tentative sniffing of fresh leaves carried by the breeze. The landscape held its breath alongside the elephant. The river shimmered with quiet life, its waters reflecting the soft light of dawn and dusk. Nearby, shoots of green pushed through the drying earth, and insects stirred amid the grasses, their presence a subtle reminder that life continued despite loss. The elephant's eyes, once clouded by exhaustion, caught the light with a faint sparkle, a trace of the alertness that had softened during the days of mourning. It lingered by the water longer, lowering its trunk to drink with increasing steadiness, the cool liquid offering a fragile reprieve from dehydration. Yet even in these moments of renewal, the animal's body language remained wary, ears flicking in vigilance, muscles tensing at every sudden sound, and the trunk occasionally sweeping protectively over the spot where the companion still lay. Anil moved quietly through the brush, maintaining a respectful distance while tracking the elephant's slow recovery. His attention was split between the signs of physical weakness and the subtle awakenings of engagement with the living world. The elephant's tentative steps away from the carcass were a sign of life's persistence, but also a reminder of how precarious the situation remained. If the animal overexerted itself or failed to find enough water and food, the risk of collapse loomed large. Yet Anil sensed a fragile hope growing, a careful negotiation between grief and survival unfolding before his eyes. The elephant's small movements, each measured and deliberate, were milestones on a path that was neither straight nor assured. Throughout the day, the elephant would pause at the riverbank, dipping its trunk to drink, and then slowly raising its head to scan the surrounding forest. Each breath it took was a testament to endurance, every cautious step a balance between fatigue and instinct. The soft rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant call of a bird in flight, these sounds stirred a faint curiosity, stirring life within the heavy quiet of mourning. Occasionally, the elephant's trunk would reach out toward a cluster of fresh leaves, pulling them gently into its mouth. The act was careful and slow, betraying both physical weakness and a quiet determination to reclaim strength. Anil knew that the risk was ongoing. Every moment spent near the carcass increased the chance of predator attention, yet leaving the site too soon meant a loss the elephant was not ready to bear. The elephant's eyes met Anil's once across the clearing, a brief, searching glance that held no human words but conveyed a fragile trust. Anil whispered softly, "You're almost there." Not expecting a response but offering a quiet reassurance. The animal's breathing steadied, ears flicking once as if to acknowledge the calm presence nearby. The human watchfulness was gentle, never pressing, a quiet thread of support woven through the slow hours of the day. The elephant's movements remained deliberate and cautious, but there was a noticeable easing in the tension that had held its body rigid in days past. Life was returning, not in leaps, but in slow, steady steps. As the sun shifted low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the river's surface, the elephant paused once more beside the fallen companion. Its trunk traced a soft arc along the dusty ground, a final gesture of connection before turning back toward the living. The animal's muscles flexed with renewed purpose, and though exhaustion lingered, so did the faintest flicker of vitality. Anil watched the elephant begin to move farther from the site, still returning often but gradually exploring the world beyond grief's immediate hold. The risk was far from over, yet the signs of renewal were unmistakable, a quiet, powerful testament to resilience in the wild. The forest around them hummed with life, the steady pulse of growth and decay playing out beneath the wide sky. Leaves fluttered in the cooling breeze, and birds called softly in the distance, reminders that even after loss, the world continued its slow turning. The elephant's tentative steps away from the carcass were steps toward survival, toward healing, fragile but real. Anil remained nearby, a steady presence, knowing that every moment was a delicate balance of hope and risk. The long vigil had not ended, but the first threads of renewal had begun to weave through the days. The first light of dawn filtered gently through the canopy, casting a soft glow over the quiet riverbank where the elephant had spent so many days. The air was cool and still, the world awakening slowly around the animal that remained tethered to the spot where its companion lay. The elephant's massive frame was motionless at first, eyes half closed as if gathering strength for what was to come. The tension that had held its body rigid in recent days softened, muscles loosening with the promise of movement. Anil watched from a respectful distance, his breath steady, knowing that this moment carried a weight beyond words. The elephant's vigil was reaching a turning point, a fragile crossing between the heavy past and the uncertain future. Slowly, the elephant lifted its trunk and reached out toward the fallen companion. The movement was deliberate but gentle, the tip of the trunk brushing lightly against the lifeless body. There was no rush, no abruptness, just a careful, tender touch that seemed to speak of farewell rather than finality. The animal's eyes, dark and steady, lingered on the familiar form as if committing every detail to memory. This was the last gesture of connection, a soft punctuation to the long vigil. The elephant's breathing was steady but deep, each exhale a release of sorrow carried silently beneath the surface. Anil remained motionless, the gravity of the scene pressing quietly against the dawn's stillness. The elephant's gaze shifted away slowly, eyes scanning the surroundings with a faint flicker of alertness and curiosity. Its body began to shift, a slow unfolding as the animal prepared to take its first steps away from the site. The movement was cautious and measured, each step weighted with the memories of loss yet driven by the instinct to survive. The elephant's trunk lifted and curled gently, brushing aside leaves and dust as it moved forward, tentative but determined. The muscles beneath its thick skin flexed with effort, the heavy limbs carrying the burden of both grief and resilience. Anil felt the tension ease slightly, knowing that this slow departure was an act of courage and healing. As the elephant moved farther from the fallen companion, the landscape seemed to respond softly. The morning breeze stirred the grasses, carrying with it the scent of earth and water. Birds called distantly, their songs weaving a fragile melody of life beyond morning. The elephant paused briefly by the river's edge, dipping its trunk into the cool water before lifting its head and stepping onward. Each movement was deliberate but marked by a growing confidence. The fragile threads of renewal slowly strengthening. The risk remained. Weakness and predators still threatened, but the animal's decision to move was a hopeful sign that survival was still possible. Anil's watchful eyes followed every step, ready to support but knowing that this crossing was one the elephant must make on its own terms. The forest around them held a quiet reverence. Leaves rustled softly in the gentle breeze, and the distant murmur of other elephants moving through the trees hinted at the world waiting beyond the vigil. The elephant's slow progress was both an ending and a beginning, a passage from grief into the uncertain space where healing might take root. Anil remained still, absorbing the profound simplicity of the moment, the delicate balance between loss and life, sorrow and hope. The elephant's journey forward was neither sudden nor dramatic, but a quiet unfolding that carried the weight of the wild itself. As the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the riverbank, the elephant's form grew smaller with each careful step. The trunk lifted once more, gently brushing the air as if testing the path ahead. The animal's breathing grew steadier, and the tension in its body eased further, muscles relaxing beneath the thick folds of skin. The connection to the lost companion remained etched deeply within, yet the choice to move was a vital act of survival and acceptance. Anil whispered softly, "You're almost there," a quiet benediction for the journey unfolding before them. The turning point had come, marked not by sudden change but by the slow, deliberate steps of an animal stepping forward from grief. The elephant's path led away from the shadow of loss toward the fragile light of renewal. Anil watched silently, carrying the moment with him as the elephant moved steadily into the wider world. The forest embraced the quiet passage, the soft sounds of life threading through the morning air, a gentle reminder that even after loss, the wild endures. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a gentle amber light across the riverbank where the elephant now stood. The air had cooled after a long day, and the soft rustling of leaves whispered through the trees, mingling with distant calls from the waking night. The elephant's movements were calm but deliberate, each step a measured cadence as it began to move away from the place where grief had held it captive for so many days. The fading light caught the curves of its weathered skin, the folds and scars telling stories of survival, resilience, and loss. Anil watched quietly from a respectful distance, sensing that this final departure was a farewell both tender and resolute. The elephant paused once, its massive frame still and statuesque. It turned its head slowly, eyes meeting the spot where its companion had rested. The glance held no human sentiment but spoke instead of recognition and memory, an acknowledgement of what had been lost and what must now be carried forward. The trunk reached out briefly, brushing against a low branch, then curled inward as the animal shifted its weight and began to walk again. The sound of heavy footsteps mingled softly with the evening chorus of crickets and distant bird calls. Each footfall was a quiet beat in a solemn rhythm, a movement away from the past and toward an uncertain future. Anil felt the weight of the moment settle deep inside him. This was more than an animal leaving a place. It was a living testament to the raw and often unseen emotions that ripple through the wild. The elephant's farewell was quiet but profound. Carried in the steady rise and fall of its breath, the gentle sway of its massive body, and the way the fading light softened every line and shadow. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the usual sounds momentarily hushed as if honoring the gravity of this parting. Despite the solemnity, there was no drama, only the natural course of life moving gently forward. The elephant's steps took it slowly deeper into the trees, the dense foliage gradually swallowing its form until only the faintest outline remained against the glowing sky. The air cooled further, carrying the scent of damp earth and fresh leaves, mingling with the fading warmth of the day. The river whispered quietly nearby, its waters reflecting the last blush of sunset like a mirror to the sky's soft farewell. Anil remained rooted at the river bank, the quiet echo of the elephant's journey settling into his thoughts. The memory of the vigil, the slow healing, and the final turning point lingered like a quiet refrain. It was a reminder of the fragile bonds that tie creatures together in the wild, bonds that often go unnoticed by the casual observer but carry immense weight in the lives they touch. The raw emotion witnessed here was a delicate thread weaving through the landscape, hidden beneath the surface but no less real. As the last light faded, the gentle wind stirred the tall grasses along the riverbank, carrying soft whispers of the day's passage. Somewhere in the distance, a herd moved quietly through the trees, their presence a subtle promise of continuity and life beyond loss. The forest resumed its natural rhythms, but the memory of this farewell lingered in the cooling air, a soft testament to the endurance of the wild heart. Anil exhaled slowly, a quiet benediction to the elephant's journey. The fading sunset wrapped the world in warmth and shadow, a final embrace before darkness settled. The elephant was gone now, a solitary figure merging with the forest's ancient pulse, yet the story remained, carried in the soft sounds of the evening, the rustling grass, and the distant movement of life continuing on.